New Phyrexia is on the rise, with Jin-Gitaxias fulfilling the ultimate plans of Elesh Norn and completing a Planeswalker into a beauty of Phyrexian grace. We understand now that more Planeswalkers will soon be perfected just as Tamiyo has. The only question we have now is, who will be next? And how many of our beloved win conditions are on the Phyrexian's chopping block? Hey everyone, Simon here for the Aether Hub, and today we will be discussing my top 5 Planeswalkers I believe will be completed next, as we eye our return to New Phyrexia. With the tragic loss of Tamiyo, or if you're a Phyrexian sympathizer, the glorious rebirth of Tamiyo into Yawgmoth's loving embrace, with Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, we were left with the ominous words of the Praetor Jin-Gitaxias himself that she would not be the last Planeswalker to be completed. And in this video, I just wanted to share who I think could be targeted next by the Phyrexians, as well as provide my lore reasons why I believe they would make wonderful allies to Elesh Norn and the other Praetors. Remember, if you enjoy my content here, guys, please show your support for the channel by clicking the like button, becoming a subscriber, and ticking the notification bell. And also make sure you leave your guesses for other completed Planeswalkers that you'd like to see in the comment section below. Tibalt. Tibalt is a fan favorite in the Magic the Gathering community despite his rather weak showing overall in the game's story. Despite his rather wonky card designs, people just love this little half-devil. Maybe it's the way he cackles, or his love of torture. Either way, Tibalt has sort of a cult following. Now, I say he's been weak in the story because since his inception, Tibalt has been literally weak. He first showed up on Innistrad and did nothing for the story but be a side note in Sorin's life in which he confronted the Devil Planeswalker and beat the living hell out of him. Tibalt sort of just slunk away after that, and Innistrad's story continued without missing a beat. He then shows up again in War of the Spark. Again, not showing us much development for his character at all, essentially just messing around with Rakdos Devils in the background. However, his character gains much needed prominence with Kaldheim, the set focused on Norse mythology, and Tibalt playing the role of and disguising himself as a trickster god. Now, this fits perfectly with Tibalt's character. He's just chaotic evil, no grand scheme, just random havoc. Though it wasn't just torture this time, and while his acts were indeed causing chaos, they were being driven, almost orchestrated by another force. Someone pointing Tibalt in the direction of a desired outcome, using him like a tool. We find out that the Praetor Vorinclex had found both Tibalt and Kaldheim in the Phyrexians' efforts to perfect the multiverse. Vorinclex had been using Tibalt as a distraction, co-opting the Planeswalker's proclivity for calamity to mask his own machinations. That plan was successful. Vorinclex got his claws on the Cosmos Elixir, a magical essence that created the Kaldheim gods, and Tibalt had some fun in exchange. A win-win. But in that deal lies why I believe Tibalt is next to be completed. Tibalt, as sick and twisted as he is, does have his limits. He's typically a solo act, and when presented with an alliance from an unknown monster, Vorinclex in this case, the Planeswalker was reluctant to participate in his plot. He even went so far as to call Vorinclex an ugly beast. So rude to one of the pillars of Phyrexian society. Still, as prideful as Tibalt is, it cannot match that of the Praetor's pride, and Vorinclex wouldn't be denied his prize on Kaldheim. So, as the story put it, Vorinclex seeded Tibalt. Their words, not mine. It was some sort of poison, and that was the best way Tibalt could describe it to us, but we already knew what this seed was. Black Phyrexian oil. It was the same stuff that almost corrupted Karn back during our first trip to New Phyrexia. Now, while Tamiyo was completed in a grand scientific experiment run by Jin-Gitaxias, I can almost promise you that that procedure involves this glistening Phyrexian oil somehow. They just simply engineered a way for this substance to work in spite of a Planeswalker spark, keeping the whole intact and ready for Phyrexian servitude. With Vorinclex's mission on Kaldheim a success, we never find out what ultimately happens to Tibalt. There's no word of him returning to Vorinclex to have this poison removed as mentioned, and the Praetor himself seems uninterested in fulfilling his end of the bargain to cure the Planeswalker after following his orders. As we know, their mission now requires more completed Planeswalkers, and Tibalt has already been seeded. It just makes good sense that Elesh Norn will soon have herself a new Rakdos-colored Phyrexian Planeswalker in Tibalt. Ashiok. the mysterious planeswalker of mist and shadows. A mage who specializes in nightmares, who has had close ties to the Phyrexians by proxy thanks to their relationship with another planeswalker, Elspeth. This character started off their development on the plane of Theros, though their origins and personal information has been left purposely vague. All we know is that they're obsessed with cultivating nightmares and has an ideology that in fear all become equal. That from the lowliest peasants to the mightiest kings, all are united universally in fear. Those who control fear can control the world. In that, Ashiok has been plaguing the plane of Theros and its heroes for years in order to craft a true and perfect nightmare. One that would be the greatest horror ever witnessed, one that could spread total fear. In that, they are sort of a scientist, running experiments and calculations on what causes the most fear in most humanoids. It sounds like your run-of-the-mill villain-type planeswalker, right? Made even more villainous by their ethereal design. But this planeswalker would soon be unquestionably tied to the Phyrexians thanks to a unique relationship with the knight-errant, the planeswalker Elspeth Tirel. There's no question that as we turn our attention to New Phyrexia, that Elspeth will be joining that fight. Her story started off with her home plane falling to the Phyrexians, and nightmares of their torturous campaign of purity still haunts her to this day. She's fought along allies like Karn and Kot to end the threat of New Phyrexia, only to fail, meaning she still has loads of unfinished business with the Praetors. But how is Ashiok connected to Elspeth, and how does this connection mean that Ashiok could be completed next? The relationship between these two planeswalkers is, of course, very antagonistic in nature. As Elspeth spent time in the underworld of Theros, Ashiok discovered her and grew fond of the fallen hero's personal nightmares. For someone as strong as Elspeth to fear nothing more than the Phyrexians, well, it piqued Ashiok's interest. They peered into the depths of Elspeth's nightmares, not conjured fiends of the imagination, but real horrors of her past. Creatures she called the Phyrexians. Beings feared across the multiverse, true instruments of terror. The more Ashiok prodded and explored these nightmarish beings, the more they were convinced that they were the key to unlocking the secrets to fear. Now having exhausted her plaything in Elspeth, Ashiok went out in search of the Phyrexians to learn from them. Now, I'm not saying that Ashiok will be willingly completed. Maybe in simply searching for the Phyrexians, this planeswalker will just get caught up and forced to serve much like Tamiyo. But I can also see that, in their search for the perfect nightmare, that they may be willingly Phyrexianized as a means to become that perfect nightmare themselves. Just think of it. I have the card name down already, Ashiok, the Perfected Nightmare. Get ready because this Dimir Planeswalker could very well be the very next completed Planeswalker. Ajani Goldmane. As much as we'd like to think only villainous Planeswalkers would turn to serve our new Phyrexian overlords, Tamiyo proved that this fight with the Phyrexians could get very personal and our losses will sting much more than, say, losing Domri Raid in War of the Spark. Now, Ajani Goldmane, the Leonin Planeswalker, may be a controversial choice to many of you watching. I mean, he is a true hero, someone looking to fight against the Phyrexians. Why, Simon, you may ask, would you pick him to be completed next? And to you loyal Etherhub fan, I say because character motivations matter when designing a compelling story. And I see no bigger drive to make characters hate the Phyrexians than them essentially killing off the literal nicest character in Magic the Gathering's multiverse. Ajani has been involved with a number of key stories in Magic the Gathering, playing important roles on the plane of Kaladesh fighting against Tezzeret, who now serves the Praetors on New Phyrexia. It was Tezzeret who ultimately subdued and brought Tamiyo in for completion on Kamigawa, and with his experience dealing with Ajani, there's an open window there that could tie the Leonin back to the Phyrexians. Facing Tezzeret isn't Ajani's only connection though. Like Ashiok, this Planeswalker is tied to this storyline thanks to his relationship with Elspeth Tirel. Their friendship has been built and tested over the years, with Ajani believing Elspeth to be permanently dead when she was killed on Theros, not knowing that she could be resurrected from the plane's underworld, which would eventually happen. Being such a good friend and guy overall, he took vengeance out on the gods who betrayed Elspeth and even continues to wear Elspeth's cloak as a reminder of the dear friend he has lost. Since those days, Ajani has been planeswalking the multiverse just looking for a worthy cause to fight for, and possibly new allies who need his aid. As I said, he's literally the best boy in MTG. But aside from being a nice guy, how could Ajani's completion continue to push character development? Well, it all comes down to Elspeth Tirel. Clearly, Elspeth will be a huge factor in our return to New Phyrexia. She hasn't seen her dear friend Ajani since her sacrifice on Theros, and he hasn't seen her since her fall. Of course, we know Elspeth is against the Phyrexians because of her past trauma, but that's a trauma us the player base aren't privy to. We weren't there, we didn't see what happened. We basically just take Elspeth's word for it. That may be good enough for some players, but what if that wound, that trauma, was opened fresh as she sees her friend Ajani completed? A mix of flesh and metal, attacking her and her allies, all while still wearing her iconic cloak. In their first meeting, despite the Phyrexian's metal grinding against his thoughts, seeing Elspeth triggers whispers of his old self, his inner hero fighting to regain control, while Elspeth herself finds a whole new reason to be reinvested in her war against the Phyrexians. When we last saw Ajani, he was meeting with both Teferi and Karn on Dominaria to discuss ways to help the resistance against New Phyrexia. He seems to be a key player in their efforts, surely picking up the fight he knew was close to Elspeth's heart. But I also believe his loyalty to his allies could put him right into the grasp of Elesh Norn, giving her and the other Praetors another completed Planeswalker. Ral Zarek. In following Ajani's heroic footsteps, I believe the lovable lightning tech caster could easily become the next pawn of New Phyrexia. Ral Zarek is a long-established character in the lore of MTG with deep-seated roots on the plane of Ravnica. Every time we returned to this plane-sized city, Ral was there, either acting as a rival or standing with us as an ally. His personal story had always been one of seeking validation, looking to finish that next big project that would get him recognition within his guild, the Izzet League, the Frenzied Engineers of Ravnica. Though through his genius he did manage to climb to the number 2 spot of the Izzet, he was always outshadowed by their guild leader, the draconic mastermind, Niv Mizzet. That's all well and good, but why do I think he could be one of the next Planeswalkers to be completed? With his latest entry in the story coming with War of the Spark, we saw a great deal of development with Ral Zarek's character. He certainly became much more of a hero despite his somewhat selfish motivations, and his ultimate goal as a character was finally reached. With Niv Mizzet becoming the new living guild pact of Ravnica, the Draco genius could no longer solely serve as the guildmaster of the Izzet League. With the dragon stepping down and the clear number 2 being a hero of Ravnica, Ral Zarek easily succeeded Niv Mizzet as guildmaster, finally quenching that validation and power the character had been seeking since his inception. This leaves a wide opening for a future development, a new step for this character. Ral Zarek is really liked by the techno crowd of MTG players as a planeswalker who tinkers, builds, and creates, which currently is a story archetype only filled by just a few other planeswalkers. Ral Zarek's background in engineering and love for science has led to some really outstanding inventions, some of which the Phyrexians could utilize in their multiversal campaign. Chief among them came as a result of his secret project, codenamed Lightning Bug. This device was able to monitor planeswalkers by the unique signature of their sparks as they left or entered Ravnica. He also incorporated this technology into a wearable pair of glasses that allowed him to find planeswalkers based on an aura of energy they gave off. As the Phyrexians are currently hunting down powerful planeswalkers for their plans, easily being able to monitor and identify them would be incredibly valuable. Right now, they're just going off whatever info Tezzeret can share, so maybe this tech would make his knowledge obsolete. Aside from this speculative motivation, we also have some evidence that Ral Zarek is at least somewhat tied to the current Phyrexian plotline. This was provided in the poorly received book Forsaken, and the side stories associated with it. In the wake of War of the Spark, Ral Zarek was seen as an unwitting accomplice of Nicobolas. While aiding in Ravnica's defense spared Ral Zarek's life, he was charged by the new Living Guild Pact to hunt down and bring to justice one of the prime contributors of the crisis, Tezzeret. Ral Zarek actually paired up with the Wanderer, a mysterious planeswalker we now know to be the Emperor of Kamigawa. They tracked the energy of Tezzeret's planar bridge to Alara and the Shard of Esper. There, they confronted Tezzeret, who proved too strong for them. The Wanderer was knocked unconscious and her unstable spark planeswalked her away immediately. Ral Zarek managed to fight Tezzeret 1v1, but it wasn't even a contest. Tezzeret beat Ral Zarek within an inch of his life, the planeswalker's lightning magic proving worthless to his enemy's mastery of the planar bridge. However, Tezzeret spared Ral Zarek's life in exchange for him lying about his fate. He charged Ral with bringing his damaged Ethereum arm back to Ravnica as proof of his death, to ensure that he would no longer be pursued. Ral accepted but ultimately told the truth about his failure, which means he may be sent back to Tezzeret at some point to finish his duty to Ravnica. There are just a lot of connections here. Love of artifice, likable character people would hate to see completed, a device that would be helpful to the Phyrexians, a former confrontation with Tezzeret, and even being paired with the Wanderer for a time, who goes on to be involved in the next major story development of New Phyrexia. Sure, War of the Sparks novels, including Forsaken and its side stories, are critically panned, and fans don't want to treat them as canon, I get it. But if they are, then we could very well see our next completed Planeswalker in Ral Zarek. Tezzeret. This may seem the most obvious choice, the man with the metal arm who ventured to Kamigawa at the behest of his Phyrexian masters and captured Tamiyo, resulting in the first ever Planeswalker completion. We have known that Tezzeret had been working alongside the Phyrexians for a while now, essentially since the conclusion of War of the Spark storyline, essentially trading in one evil master in Nicol Bolas for another. Still, Tezzeret isn't a surefire target for completion because if he were, he probably would have been Phyrexia's very first test subject. So where do I stand? Well, he's on this list, so clearly I believe he will be completed, but maybe not in the way you first think. Tezzeret's relationship with the Phyrexians is actually pretty extensive, first learning about them while scouting New Phyrexia and assessing their threat to his then master Nicol Bolas. Tezzeret must have liked what he saw in their society and ideology because from that point, he would frequently be seen subtly aligning himself with the Praetors of New Phyrexia. I'm not going to cover that entire relationship specifically in this video. I think that could make a great topic for its own discussion, but for context, Tezzeret is a willing servant to the Phyrexians, but has yet to be Phyrexianized. So why wait if you so agree with their ambition to fuse all mortal flesh with perfect machinery? It's essentially the ideals of Esper, Tezzeret's home plane, an ideology that Tezzeret himself is a living example of, incorporating Ethereum into his own body and essentially becoming a cyborg in MTG. So why not just bite the bullet and become a Phyrexian already? There are a couple points that we can really only theorize on why Tezzeret hasn't been completed yet, one on the Planeswalker's part and the other on the Praetors. First, there may be an issue with Tezzeret's planar bridge. This device, essentially funded by Nicol Bolas, is used to transport inorganic material across the multiverse. He used it to bring in Bolas's undead army from Amonkhet to Ravnica, and he used it again to transport the Praetor Vorinclex to Kaldheim. That test was a little janky as all the fleshy bits of Vorinclex kinda got vaporized, a consequence they seem to have ironed out with Jin-Gitaxias as he showed no such ill effects in traveling to Kamigawa. This planar bridge is key to the Phyrexians' plans. It's their only means to travel the multiverse themselves. Without it, they would have to rely on their planeswalking servants or slaves. And the Phyrexians don't simply just trust their minions for anything. They're a little more calculating and fickle than that, so maybe Tezzeret isn't allowed to be completed, simply because there may be some unknown effect to the planar bridge technology. The process of completion is still very much a mystery, and they have just learned how to perform it on a Planeswalker, so maybe the Praetors don't want to risk their most valuable tool just to complete Tezzeret, who is already offering his services for free. Another reason comes from Tezzeret and his own plans. He has something valuable to offer the Phyrexians, but he is a Planeswalker consumed by the need for power and control. After being enslaved by Bolas, I doubt he would put himself in a position to be used again, especially so quickly. I believe he offered his services willingly under the guise of servitude in order to position himself strategically within their society, and to take the opportunity when it presents itself to steal away power on New Phyrexia, perhaps in becoming the new father of machines. It would be very fitting for Tezzeret's character, a man essentially defined by his minion status for so long, to finally become the master for a change. And to do that, you can't simply just complete yourself and be fully and totally under their will. So for now, Tezzeret is biding his time, using his planar bridge as a bargaining chip to stay off completion. So why do I think he will eventually be Phyrexianized? Tezzeret is ambitious, of that there is no doubt, but a common theme of these overly ambitious villains is that their reach exceeds their grasp. We saw in the epilogue of Kamigawa that already Tezzeret speaks ill of some of the other Praetors, or at least calls into question aspects of loyalty of those who are completed. It wouldn't be a stretch for a character like Tezzeret to play subtle misinformation games between the Praetors and sow seeds of doubt amongst them. They are cold, unfeeling, and organized, but they also protect the whole of Phyrexia over all else. If one feels another Praetor will betray their grand design, they will be exiled, i.e. the Praetor Urabrask. Perhaps Tezzeret is again playing his games behind the scenes, looking to upend the influence of Elesh Norn, the theorized strongest and head of the Phyrexian machine. But as so often the case, Tezzeret will misjudge his opponent. Elesh Norn is strong, crazy strong, wielding unparalleled influence over New Phyrexia with almost religious fervor. Tezzeret's schemes will come to light, and Elesh Norn will make an example of him. He will finally be the ideal Esperite, as he will become completed. And there you guys go, the 5 other Planeswalkers I believe could be amazing additions to the army of New Phyrexia. The story setting up our return to New Phyrexia seems to be the perfect chance to correct what I believe was a huge misstep in what was supposed to be the most epic story in MTG's history: the failed War of the Spark. Now, many in the Vorthos community, myself included, believed War of the Spark would be a story about sacrifice and loss. This massive scale of Nicol Bolas purging the sparks and lives of Planeswalkers to fuel his own ascension to godhood. That basis alone was enough to prime the player base for many heart-wrenching moments. As we watch our favorite Planeswalkers slain to the undead minions of Bolas, or perhaps by the dragon himself. As we succeeded in defeating our foe, we celebrate in the backdrop of our beloved fallen never to oh yeah, that actually never happened. We had like one meaningful death, one off-screen death, and another, who was that again, death? With the explanation that all the sparks Bolas was getting in that war were coming from, quote, countless other nameless Planeswalkers who also became trapped. The writers were in no uncertain terms cowards when it came to War of the Spark, and the story suffered greatly as a result. Of course, players don't want to see their favorite characters die, but nothing helps drive the emotional response to a story quite like a noble sacrifice. Or, failing the noble sacrifice, a brutal and gutting loss. But with War of the Spark's failure, it sets up a redemption with New Phyrexia, and the Planeswalkers we're hopefully about to lose in their rise to power. Whether you're a perfect, devout follower of Yawgmoth or a troubled denier of Phyrexia's vision, you scum, you can't deny that the Praetors are out for Planeswalkers and will not stop at just Tamiyo. Whomever is next, lost to the machinations of New Phyrexia, I'm sure it will cause great division in the player base of Magic the Gathering. And that's a debate we can start right now in the comment section below. Who do you think could be completed next? What Planeswalkers would you like to see serving the great New Phyrexia campaign? And with that, I want to thank you all so much for joining me today for this discussion. If you enjoyed the video, please consider supporting the channel by leaving it a like, subscribing, and sharing it on social media. It all goes a long way in helping grow our little community here. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, guys, see ya!